put your virtual hand up and we will unmute you. You can put your virtual hand up by clicking on participants and then clicking on the blue hand button. If you would like to ask a question, but you don't really want to speak, you can chat, you can text, or you can Zoom chat one of us. So that would be TEDx moderators, me or Annika or Serene, our co-director, and we can ask those questions for you. If you have any issues, questions, concerns, you can refer to any of us TEDx UCSD members. We all have our those words or letters TEDx UCSD written right next to our name, so please feel free to personally message us. But aside from that, today we have Hannah Martin's talk. Her talk calls on our attention to the importance of community and empowerment. So in the recent years, the rate of Latina-owned businesses has increased more than any other marginalized group. This makes Latina women, so what makes Latina women start their own business? Where are their strengths and resources, and how can we get all of those? So her talk incorporated facts of the current status of entrepreneurship, her personal anecdotes, and the stories of Latina entrepreneurs, and she shared us and inspired us to think outside of traditional roles and helped and showed us how Latina women reboot their lives by starting their own businesses. So thank you very much, Hannah, for being here.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the summary, Aishi. So Hannah, I'm going to ask the first question. Could you talk us through your process of creating your talk? What was it like to come up with the idea, and where did the inspiration for it come from?
Sure. So I think it started with I still had this story to tell. I had started my business. I had started to kind of tell part of that story just on my own platform, but I had never really yet dug into the reasons why and my experience with it, and especially the experience of many of my clients. And I think that it's important to tell that story. And so it really just kind of jumped out at me. It was like, this is the thing I need to tell everyone. I mean, Ted's whole thing, is like ideas worth spreading. And this was my idea worth spreading. It felt very authentic to my heart and my work. But then the process of it, I think, it's really interesting. In the talk, I said that I practiced this in front of a bunch of Latino women that I just met online. And one of the pieces of advice that really stuck with me when I was first writing it, I was really heavily basing it on fact. I had a lot of statistics, which it still has some, but I actually took out a lot because one of the women was like, it's really actually a Western practice to depend on these statistics. Like, our heritage is really more about storytelling and about just, sharing your heart with an audience, with someone. And that was a big part of the process for me, was to kind of like unlearn that. And I found that to be a really interesting experience, and definitely something I'll remember with any talk that I give in the future.
That's so cool, the power of using your own experiences to tell a story. And so we're really happy to have you talk at our event and be here for us today. One of our audience members has a question. Emily asks, what are your thoughts on the growing popularity of the term Latinx?
So I have a funny story about that, actually. I shared this, with like a bunch of people, some of them Spanish speakers, and it's not really actually a phrase used in Spanish. Like, I don't know of really a translation. So when it kept being said in my talk, Latin eggs, and so they were saying like wiggle sand, like, I don't understand. But I think that it is important to be more inclusive and to kind of create that space for more people. So I try to use it, at least just speaking about groups generally. I was actually just talking to someone about this, like, how do you really conjugate that? I don't really know. So it's hard, I think, to kind of integrate it fully into the language as a practice. But when you're speaking of groups of people, I think it's important to create space for people. And that's really what like my whole work has been, is creating space for people and creating a space where they feel like they can come forward and be their authentic selves. So I wanted to make sure that I incorporate that into my own language.
For sure. We kind of had the same type of language, like in Filipino spaces, we use Filipinx, but like it's usually the O and the A that's in like the regular language, like Latina, Latino, Filipino, Filipina.
Yeah.
But I definitely get what you're meaning with trying to be inclusive with everybody. Because, yeah, that's also a really important part of both cultures, I'd say. Um,
Mm-hmm.
our next question is, you spoke in your talk about how you felt oppressed by the traditional workplace, and that's one of the biggest reasons why you decided to create your own business. So what advice would you give to someone who, like yourself, feels oppressed by the traditional workplace?
I think it's always important to advocate for yourself, no matter where you are. That is one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned in any situation. It's really learning about how to talk about yourself and, in a way, kind of write your own story. Because I think if you let other people tell you who you are, it's really hard to know who you are. And so if you feel like you're being oppressed in any situation, I think it's important, one, to kind of take a step back and reevaluate who are you really and what do you value and what do you want in this situation. And for me, it was this long process of trying to come to a compromise. And I just realized that that wasn't really happening for me. And that's why I decided eventually that it was like, I'm not going to get what I need here and what I want and where that's going to happen. Honestly, I quit my job before I had a job lined up. And I didn't know I was going to start a business. I had no idea. I thought I was just going to freelance for a bit. And then it was like, wait, I think I have something here. And that's really where it kind of unfolded. So I would say just having that that sense of self is always more important than anything else. Honestly, more important than telling someone who you are or anything along those lines. But like, you knowing who you are in your heart will lead you to where you need to go. And so like, take that step first before anything else, but always advocate for who that person is.
For sure, yeah. I think that's really important that you like took a step back and kind of analyzed your situation and decided what the best solution was for you. And that's amazing that you didn't even know what you were going to do when you quit your job. Could you go more into why you decided to start a marketing company specifically?
Sure. So I've been doing kind of this online digital marketing kind of work ever since. I mean, it feels like forever. Like, we grew up in an online space, right? But especially in college, I think it became very apparent to me that we had like a over 50% commuter college. And so creating those online spaces for people to exist in and to have that kind of participation was really important to the work that we were doing. I was part of a lot of student groups. Like I said in my talk, I'm always an activist at heart. And so I've just been kind of part of these online communities and building them. So to me, marketing is activism. It's about telling your story and having control over that narrative and giving people a platform and helping them build that to tell their story. So that's really what, I mean, it worked out for me also, just because that's where my skills are. That's what I'm good at. So it was this really harmonious kind of intersection of like, I want to do activist work. I want to do something I'm good at. And I want to be able to really help the people that I'm signing up to help. So I need to be good at doing that. But marketing for me, it felt like there was most opportunity there, that I could help people tell their story and bring more stories to the forefront.
That's actually so cool. I never thought of marketing as a way of activism. And I think marketing almost seems like a fake thing where it's like, oh, you're just trying to sell yourself. But I love how you rewrote the whole narrative to be like, I'm not selling myself. I'm showing you how much I have to offer and showing potential. And I think that's naturally gravitating. People gravitate towards that. So that's really interesting. And kind of like a follow-up to that, I want to ask, what's one of the most memorable businesses or women that you've helped start a business or market their business?
Sure. So just really quick too, I think with marketing, like, we think of it that way because there's a lot of kind of like, there's a lot of how would I say this? Like, I don't know, kind of male energy around marketing. Like, that's really what we think of it. And I think business too. And so we think of this like, sell stuff, make money, like Jeff Bezos. And it's just like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like, anything in business doesn't have to be that way. And when you say like sales too can be icky and like, it, for me, sales, like working with my clients, it's actually this journey of worthiness. Like it's like really fully realizing what you're worth and being able to speak about that. Like that's super empowering and a whole other journey in itself. But anyways, I digress. Okay. This is like where I could just, have a whole sermon, but the most memorable business, let's see. There's so many, like there's just, I'm so fortunate to have had so many people share their heart with me. Like I said, this is a very personal journey, and I'm so fortunate to have been part of that. But I think, I think it's, I feel like I'm picking a child. Like, I think I'm going to pick two. And actually one is my aunt, and she was like one of my first clients when I was freelancing in the kind of interim. And it was just really great. I think that was the first time that I realized like I could really do this. I think I'd been existing in this space. And so it's more about me, this one, but like, I'd been existing in this space where I didn't feel like I could realize my full potential. And so really being able to do that and seeing the positive effects that I could have on someone and that I was making money doing this, like it was just mind blowing to me. And also just, of course, to see the progress that they were able to make and the way that they rethought their whole, we were working on an email marketing campaign, but they like rethought what that meant and like, how do you speak to your audience and how are we selling in this whole journey of worthiness? Like that was, especially someone so close to me, that was great to see. And then more recently, I just finished this like group coaching program where I helped this artist who she's like in activism and has been searching for those spaces, I feel like, in a lot of different jobs, but always in her heart, she had this desire to just paint, and she wanted to be able to support herself doing that. And we went from her making maybe a couple $100s from like friends or family off each painting to she's now working on like a 4-figure commission with someone. And it's just like, just to see that progress of, like I said, this journey of worthiness is really powerful. And that's what means more to me than like the numbers or like how much money, like that's awesome. But then really feeling like that full sense of worth that comes with it is really why I love what I do.
That's amazing. I love how you brought worthiness into it because a lot of times it's hard to feel validated, especially as an entrepreneur. So having a community where you're able to kind of affirm each other is really important. So our next question comes from the audience. We have Serene. We're going to unmute her so she can ask you herself.
Sure.
Hi, Hannah. My question for you is, who do you think has been your biggest inspiration throughout your life or throughout your career journey so far?
In my talk, I spoke about my Willow, and he, I think, is my greatest inspiration. He, he's the guy that got our family out of Cuba and brought us here for all the opportunity that we have, but also, more than anything, I think it's also just his kindness of heart and the way that he supported us. And when I quit my job, it was actually, my Willow passed away in December, and I just had this like clarity moment where it was just like, this is not what I was meant to do. Like I was meant to do much more than this, and he would have wanted more than this. And maybe that's like way too in the weeds here, but it was like, what would he want me to do? And it was like, he would just want me to do whatever makes me happy. And that's really, I think, what he pursued through his whole life is just like, this makes me, I'm just going to lean into whatever makes me happy. I'm just going to explore all my interests, and there's opportunity here. And just having that kind of like abundance mindset is like a really hot term right now, but just that kind of feeling of like, something's going to work out if I do what I'm meant to do. And just having that courage and that, but still that kindness of heart is what really inspires me in my work.
That's amazing. That's so cool that even after his passing away, his legacy still stayed with you, and that you were able to forward that and like turn it into your own. That makes me very happy. We have another person in the audience who has a question. Vaibhav, you will be unmuted, and you can ask your question.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you so much for being here. My question is, you spoke about male energy, like in reference to like marketing in the business place. And I kind of have like a two-part question. One, how do you navigate, that environment? And two, how do we be like, how do men be allies to the Latinx population and women of color in general?
Sure. So when you ask how I navigate that energy, honestly, I don't. I created a whole other space. Like I lead with my heart, which is honestly a lot. I think we embody both of those energies in ourselves. So I'm not to say that like I exclude all energy that's male, but I think leading first with this a heart of compassion and understanding and like this activist heart is what's really important to me. And I think that thinking first about, like I said, marketing is just storytelling, and just how can we think about that first? How can we make this the most powerful story, not just for the people that will hear it, but for the person telling it? And kind of like how you have all said through even just this talk of like rewriting some narratives, like you just have to reframe some things and rethinking it. So I think again, it's just taking a step outside of what we accept as the norm and say, what's missing here? Like what do I wish this could be, and what could this really provide? And just taking that step back first before we do what's expected of us has been where I've found just like the most innovative energy, like the most powerful kind of contribution I feel like I can make or anyone can make to a business. And then for the second one, your second question, being an ally. So I have some issue with the word ally. I heard recently this distinction between allyship and accomplishship. And I think about that all the time. So an ally is someone, if you haven't heard this yet, ally is someone that's like, yeah, I support this cause and I'm with it and, I know about it. But an accomplice is someone that's willing to put their privilege on the line to then make a change on behalf of someone else. And I think accompliceship is really what we should be striving for. If you're saying, I want to help and I want to make a change, then take stock of your own privilege and say, how can I actually, use this, leverage this for someone else's benefit? So I think often too, depending on our own identities, like there's lots of intersecting things that we hear about, like what's oppressed or what's not oppressed in our identity, but we all have power. We all have that. And that's what I really wanted to bring in my talk too. It's like, there are so many stories of oppression of women of color, but there's also lots of stories of power that we don't necessarily hear about. So taking stock and saying, like what choices do I have in this kind of system, wherever you're working within, and like what then can I influence to make a better change for someone? It's that accomplice kind of mindset. Does that make sense? Do you have any follow-up questions on that?
No, I just think, yeah, like the word ally is used quite predominantly when you're talking about supporting another cause, but I think reframing that perspective and how you utilize that support and that network is really important. But I really like the analysis of like the systems and the framing of power itself. But yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think we all have choices, and it's just about using them wisely.
Yeah, I've never heard the term accomplishment before, and that's something I'll definitely be keeping in mind going forward. So thank you for that. And thank you, Vibe Hub, for your question. The next question comes from Reem from the audience. So we will unmute you, Reem, to ask your question.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciated it. It definitely resonated with me a lot. So I am an Arab American woman, and I am working in consulting right now, which is predominantly white male. And I'm moving into finance, which is even more so predominantly white male. And I'm finding myself kind of navigating the choice between moving towards a fund that is just regular and only white males working there versus working at a fund that's more POC female focused. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that navigation and kind of your role in defying the norms.
Your question brings to mind, there's like this feminist phrase, it's like male and pale and stale. Like that's a lot of systems of power. I don't know, it makes me giggle at least a little when I think of that. But as far as navigating those systems, I think it's about, like I said, kind of taking that step back and taking stock of like, who are you really? And what do you want to accomplish? And where can you accomplish that? Even if it looks a little different, it might be that you're going with more this male and pale arena, but it's like, you know, I can see myself making that change. And it does take a little bit more of, you know, of course, doing that with the knowledge that it's going to take a little bit more. It might take a little longer. It might take a little more compromise. But something also that I'm even learning personally is like right now is that, you know, we have to love the journey as much as we love the outcome. So like, which journey do you love more? And for me, I joined every space to try to find that fit. And I just kept like opting out of each one until I found the space where I had created it. I felt like I had learned enough that I had to do something with it. And that's when I was like, okay, it's time to create a space of my own. But for me, I mean, this story goes back even further, right? Like I've been working since I was 16, but like I joined the political science kind of scene and like activist scene with the 2016 election. Like I changed my major. I was pre-med until then and changed it to political science because I was like, this is the journey that I need. This is the journey I'm going to love. And it speaks more to my heart than the journey of being a doctor. And then even like I worked on campaigns first because I was like, this is the journey that I love. And I want to be part of helping these candidates, you know, find their own space. And then I was like, actually, no, that's not the journey I love. It just, you keep going through these journeys until I think you feel like, for me personally, I just got to this place where, like I said, like I have enough that I've learned that I just feel like I have to do something with it. And with everyone that I've worked with, I think like all of my clients, there's always this moment of clarity, and it's really quite powerful because they'll be going back and forth, and I'm just not sure. And then something just clicks. And I know that's not a great answer, you know, like wait for the moment of clarity. But truthfully, like in my experience, that's where it comes, is you just kind of go like, you know, I don't need to do this, or, oh, I really do want to do this. And it's just like everything else melts away and it doesn't matter. And it's okay to make mistakes too. It's okay if you don't get that moment of clarity and you just have to go with your gut. Like it's all our own journey. So long story short, I guess it's just, you know, like what journey do you love more?
Yeah, that's very empowering to hear from someone who's been through it, because I think standing on the other side where you don't know what to do, it's like, oh my gosh, what next? What now? So that's really nice to hear those inspiring words. Thank you for that. And thank you, Reem, for your question. I hope this cleared some things up for you. Next, we have a question from Todd. So take it away, Todd.
Hi, Hannah. I just want to say that your story is super inspirational. I could resonate a lot with how you said that you used to be pre-med and then you decided that this wasn't really the way for you. Like, in a way, there's so many other ways to help people, and that's not just through like medical or like health. I was wondering what your transition was like towards making that like clear decision, and like the struggles you had along the way / like your mental process about that.
Do you mean the decision of switching from pre-med?
Yeah.
Okay. For me, so it was a longer process than, you know, what I just alluded to. It was, I was pre-med. I had several internships actually, and was doing really well within them, but I just didn't feel fulfilled. I had learned that the health system that we currently have, and obviously still have, doesn't actually serve, you know, I wouldn't be able to serve my patients the way that I would want to. I would see them for maybe 2 minutes and I would, you know, just be I didn't feel like that human connection was there. And that's where my activist heart was, is I need connection with people. I need to feel like they know who, they feel seen. And I didn't feel like I could do that being a doctor. And so I was still, I had kind of left the pre-med field, and I was still in biology as a major. And I was thinking to myself, like, what other spaces can I join as a biology major? I still love this so much. I'm a very kind of strategic thinker, and that's what I loved about biology, is like everything has its place and it works in this way. But then it was like, it seemed like the only place that I could go was research. And I just didn't see myself enjoying that journey. It was just like, I feel like I'm going to be someone's assistant for so long, and then maybe I'll get into academia. But I also knew there were a lot of barriers there. And that ceiling just didn't feel, it didn't feel satisfying to me. And so, like, I think there's a lot of kind of rewriting we have to do, but finding that ceiling for yourself and saying, like, what can I really accomplish to the full extent with this journey? And am I satisfied with that? Because for me, it was pre-med. I was like, I'm going to be a surgeon. And, when I'm gone this many years into medical school, no one's going to tell me how to do anything because I'm a surgeon. And once it was like, well, we're not going to do that, it was like, well, I don't really love this new ceiling. I don't really love what I would be capable of doing. So it's the same thing with my talk. It was like I had tried several different avenues, and every time I hit the ceiling, and it was like, I don't really like the ceiling. Like, I'm not satisfied with this. So just, I think for me, I was sparked by the 2016 election. It was a really big deal. A lot of people were. Maybe you won't get that kind of, fire blazing kind of event, but like, what does your heart really tell you? And what ceiling do you want for yourself? What do you really want to accomplish? And I think that'll help guide you.
I love that, the concept of different ceilings that we're all trying to break. That's really cool. The next question I have is, where do you hope to be 10 years from now? And do you think society will have progressed with these types of issues that women, and especially women of color, are facing?
10 years from now, I want this to be more than just me. Like, it is already, but I want this business to be more than just me. I would love to have a team. I would love to be serving people on a larger level. And I think I'm still figuring that out now, which is the fun of being a small business, like a really small one, is that you're super nimble and you can do whatever you want. It's also the most terrifying part, is that you're super nimble and you can do whatever you want. But I think that having kind of that larger impact is what I always have wanted. And just being able to, you've seen other kind of marketing stars kind of make it in that way. And I feel like almost now it's just this idea of thought leadership. Like, love to be part of that. I'd love to see my mission be part of that thought leadership. You see, I was just, in marketing, I think a lot of people are inspired by the greats of like Tony Robbins and like all of these other people that just, they don't fit my MO. And that's where I hope to be, is to be part of that, to be, to have set a new example. And then as far as progressing, I think that with how many women of color are starting their businesses and how prominent we are and how much we contribute to the economy, I think it might be kind of, I don't know, I always kind of have a little bit more of a skeptic's view on politics. And if you really think about it, I don't think we've come all that far with the issues of racism and xenophobia and sexism. Like, there's still a lot of that, and it's because it's baked into the society, right? But I think that in our own spaces, that's more important, of building that momentum, that change. And that's what we're seeing, is that despite everything, women of color are starting businesses, and Latinas are starting them faster than anyone else. Like, there's power in that, no matter what. And so I think that's where the progress will be made, is within our own communities and building those spaces for people. which is also just why I think I'm drawn to digital marketing. And, it's building online spaces. It's super accessible, and just making sure that when people are ready, there's a place waiting for them.
I love that so much. The idea of becoming the norm in 10 years, becoming who we want to see in media, being part of something bigger. That's so cool. And then your idea about not being able to trust politicians. I've been learning in my in my international politics class about bottom up change, and change coming from within the community and not from leaders necessarily. So I think your sentiment there really echoed that and kind of explained it in a way where I can understand it more. Now I understand my professor. So that's really cool. Thank you. We have a question from another one of our audience members. Coco asks, what's your biggest hardship while starting your own business? What was something that was hard, whether it be technical or your experience?
I'll say before I started my business, it's literally just starting it. It's just getting started. It's just saying to yourself, I'm enough. And, in fact, I'm actually very good at this, and I can do this, and I can stand on my own 2 feet, and I deserve this. That's a lot of the work that I do with my clients in the beginning is, like, you deserve this. You're worthy. You are very good at your job. And what if you apply that to yourself? What if you apply that to your own life and your own business? With no ceiling in the way, imagine what you could accomplish. But after starting my business, I think I think a lot of business owners, especially entrepreneurs, don't really talk about this, but you definitely need support. And honestly, for me, it was accepting that support that was really hard, because I had just gone through this whole transition of like, I can do this, I deserve this, I'm so powerful. And then I just felt like, like, oh, but I need help, I need support, I need, whether that be like, I'm fortunate that my parents have been able to financially support me in this transition, because I was working at a nonprofit. I didn't have any money stored up, right? Like, so making that transition and putting my pride aside, I think that being an entrepreneur and owning your own business, you are humbled every single day. And you have to realize not only what your strengths are, like you have to know that to get started, but you have to know your weaknesses too. And you have to be very comfortable with them. You have to look them in the eye every day and say, like, what are we going to do about this? So I think kind of that balance of ego almost. I'm also just a very prideful person. So putting that aside was, I think, my biggest kind of hardship in a way, like learning to be confident, but then also put it away and, like deal with what you need to deal with at the moment.
Yeah, that balance sounds really interesting and kind of a difficult thing to figure out, especially at first. Kind of going off that, we have a question from the audience from Sabrina. So she asks, how did you deal with all the uncertainty during your decision to quit your job and start your own business? And what was your journey like in finding your own voice and space?
The uncertainty is something I had to get comfortable with. That was, I wouldn't say a hardship, but it's certainly a lesson that I learn a lot and often, and I keep learning it. Entrepreneurship just comes with a lot of uncertainty. And if you're not ready to be uncertain, you're not ready to be an entrepreneur. You're not ready for that step. And so for me, it was baby steps. It was, by the time I quit my job, I'd been applying to other jobs for a year. And even as I told you, when I quit, it was like, I'm going to get another job. I didn't even have this idea yet. And so I think just kind of being thrown into the pool, which I did to myself, I pushed myself into the pool of uncertainty of like, we don't have a job right now. We don't know where we're going to go from here. I've been applying to jobs for a year and I'm not finding a job worthy of my capabilities. What are we going to do? And I think just getting comfortable really quick with that uncertainty is actually the key. So take it as slow as you need. For me, I was there probably probably, you know, my friends and family were like, you should have left a year ago. Like, I had come to this conclusion a long time ago, and I had been working through this in a way for a long time, but I wasn't yet ready to face that uncertainty until that moment, until it mattered so much that it didn't matter what happened. It was just like, I don't know what it is, but I just had this moment of certainty. And you know, when I quit, I kind of had this like mantra that was like, I kept telling myself, like, I have nothing to lose but the weight of this job. I just kept telling myself that over and over and over. Like, this job is only weighing me down, and I just have to be certain about that, and something better will come. And I mean, like, if not, I'll make it. And I did. So, and then as far as my journey with finding my own voice, from day one, I've just been very much myself. And even honestly, watching my own talk, the way that I recorded it, I'm much more of like a structured speaker in my talk, but as you can see, I'm very much not that way. And so kind of finding, like, almost like discovering these different versions of myself in business has been interesting. But I think it's just about being authentically you from the beginning and just being ready. And I think all that work, like I said, where I had taken a step back and been like, who are we really? What do we want? All of that internal work really served me very well when I did make that decision to step into that uncertainty, because it was like, I don't know anything except for who I am and what I want. And then nothing could change my mind from there. And things just kind of felt like they fell more into place from there, because it was just this place of self. It was this place of me and what I want. And that's all I needed in the world. So, I mean, take it slow, but those are the suggestions that I have. Like, really be grounded in yourself, your authentic self, not who you think people need or want, and be ready to be uncomfortable.
I love that sentiment. It's such a important sentiment, but it's so hard to achieve. So much appreciated. And thank you for your question. We have another question from Macy. She asks, what advice would you give to a woman suffering from imposter syndrome, especially from workplaces that are predominantly male?
So, imposter syndrome, I got this weird relationship with it, because I feel like when you say, like, I'm suffering from imposter syndrome, you've recognized it, right? Like, we realize that it's not real, that it's coming from this systemic oppression, and you have a choice to make. You can either say, this is the oppressive world that I live in, or you can take that step back again and say, who am I really, and what am I capable of, and what do I actually know to be true? And it depends, like, that choice is the most important choice you can make, because then it's what you're rooting your work in, and yourself and your sense of worthiness from there. So if you're rooting it in this, like, I'm always going to be in this oppressive environment and nothing's ever going to change, and maybe I actually don't know what I'm doing, then that's what's going to show up. That's what's going to be in your life, because that's how you now have perceived the world and how you are processing the world at all times. But if instead you make that conscious decision to say, this is imposter syndrome, and it sucks, and it's not real, because I know I've accomplished this, this, and this, and I'm really good at this, or I'm just a kind person. And even if it's just like, I took care of myself today, we have to be, I mean, that was a big journey for me too. It's just learning to be kind to myself and saying, like, I can do this, and I'm worthy, and I'm valuable, and all of those things. So I think actually too, being part of, you know, my last job was a lot of advocating for myself. It was a lot of conflict in doing so. And it forced me to see myself in a different way, because I chose then to root myself in what I knew to be my capabilities and my value, not what I was being told I could be capable of doing. There, it was like this practice all the time of, you know, rewriting that story that came out all the time in my work. Because no matter what anyone told me, I knew I was good at my job. And I think that sense of worth, like that, knowing who you are, is the most powerful thing. So, I mean, it's a lot of kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy in your own mind. But, actively challenging those thoughts is where you get that sense of worth. And so just like, it's hard because we have to be active all the time in doing that, right? But it's important, because if we forget our worth, then like you kind of lose your worth. You kind of, if you let someone take that from you, that's it. So I think just more having that cultivating that sense of worth on the inside is more important.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the concept of like flipping the concept or flipping imposter syndrome on its own head, and not really like recognizing it, but not taking it personally. Just like realizing that you are a person that has worth and you are capable no matter what anybody around you says, because a lot of the affirmation has to come from yourself, I guess, in that setting.
Well, and I also just want to add too, like, I think a lot of these questions that come from like working within a system of oppression, I think it's really common that we adopt the language of the oppressor and we just accept it as true. Like we accept that I am a woman of color working in this oppressive environment, and therefore that means I can only do this. Or I'm an oppressed woman. Like, that's the truth that I live now because that's what I'm told by the system. And, that's not to say that you can step outside these systems. You can't. And I don't want to oversimplify it too, because I still want to say too, it sucks being part of this system of oppression, but it doesn't change inherently your value. And I think realizing that is really what carried me through all of this, was just knowing my value no matter what.
Definitely, yeah. We have another question from the audience, from Myra. So she asks, your talk mentioned one of the barriers to women of color is starting a business is financing. What do you think should change in the current system of financing?
Okay. So I had this whole section on getting loans or securing funding from banking that I took out just because I had too many statistics. But now that I have this opportunity, I think, so the research shows that when people of color, not even just women of color, when people of color apply for funding of any sort from like a bank, they're less likely to get like the kinds of funding that they're more likely to get are ones that cost more personally. And so they're higher risk and they cost more personally to you, and how you end up paying out, or what you put up as collateral, or like on your credit, all those things. Those are just the kinds of loans that people of color get. And that's, that's due to the kind of systems that we've built into our country. And so, we've seen how badly this affects people with PPP right now with COVID going on. Like, I think the stats are something like, the best stat is, I think 75% of Asian-owned businesses didn't get PPP, but the worst is 99 or 97% of Black-owned businesses didn't get PPP. And so, like, for a system that was built to serve small businesses, that's a huge failure. And I think that's because it was built without consideration, or maybe even built intentionally to not serve these populations. Because when you think of PPP as a loan, and so when we know the loan service, like the practices of loans are not built to serve people of color, then of course they're not going to get the needed aid that they have. And there's like crazy stats right now that are saying, like, I think it's something like 50 or 60% of Latinx businesses are going to go under because of this, and they're never going to come back. But anyways, I think the change in financing, I brought up venture capital in my talk because that's the worst stat. But also venture capital is something that I think should be, I've heard it more talked about as a last resort, because it brings in like other people's opinions and you kind of lose power over your own organization. But the change that I think needs to happen is more systemic. It's more about addressing and those issues that like this institution was built on, about, like when you think about generational wealth and what privileges we have access to or don't have access to. When we build these systems, are we keeping those in mind? And we're not. And so that's really the change that I think needs to happen. And, you know, I don't have a finance background, so I don't know the actual like little changes that need to happen. But in my opinion, that's just, that consideration isn't going into building the system as it is or making those changes. And we've seen that with the response to COVID. And I think that obviously, I mean, this whole situation has just exposed a whole lot of the oppressive systems that we live in. But I digress. So I think just building systems from the beginning with more consideration, you know, like when we had this loan forgiveness program go out for COVID, did we build it with the intention of actually serving small businesses, of serving people of color owned businesses? We didn't. And so like changes like that, I think is where it starts. But I have more like there's so many stories that I got from Latinas where they're like, you know, my mom had to take her white male neighbor with her to get a loan because she just wasn't getting anything. Or many women of color are self-funding their business, which actually means usually they're asking friends and family for money. And that's just like, you know, in the final part of my talk, that's where it's like, we need to do better. These are people who are supporting, they're the single most entrepreneurial group, and we're not giving them the resources that they deserve. So that's my take on that.
I like that a lot, and I have a follow-up kind of based off of it. So how do you think we as a society can better invest in human potential? Because it sounds like so much of it is left up to other people. So how can other people do better?
I think there's a consideration, this was a huge fight for me in the nonprofit sector, but there's a difference between equality and equity, right? Equality means we all get the same stuff. Equity means we get what's appropriate based on our own privileges. So if we create a more equitable society, I think that's really where we need to head. We need to have these considerations when we're building out the loan forgiveness program or the, you know, loan system in general, or banking, or anything. Like, there's no longer, you know, affirmative action. And so like we're seeing the effect of that with like medical school, like the rate of people of color going to medical school, of going to like certain colleges, like that's important, because we need to have that equitable kind of take on things in order to make the change, because there's just hundreds of years of oppression. You don't just undo that. So I think it's more about focusing on an equitable society rather than an equal one.
Yeah, I think the difference between equitable and equal is really important, because right now we definitely don't have an equal world, but if we can somehow get to having an equitable world where a lot more people can make change in that, that's really important. We have a question from Monica in the audience.
Yeah. Hi, Hannah. So you mentioned in your talk that you decided to quit your job after reflecting and realizing the implicit and explicit bias of the people who you thought were meant to be your advocates. Mm-hmm. Can you share an anecdote of one of those moments where you realized that was just simply enough, and like, what was your last straw?
So it really was more of a slow burn than you probably imagine. It wasn't like that's it, I'm out of here. I definitely had those moments. But I think that it was just the consistency in not feeling like those advocates were showing up for me in the way that I thought they should. Like I said, I had rooted myself in this sense of worthiness, and I had not only that sense, but like literally the data of what I was doing and how it was contributing to our organization. And I didn't feel like I was being represented fairly based on that. And I think there were several instances, like I said, it was this consistency. It was performance reviews where it's like, you're doing great, you're doing perfect actually, and we don't want to offer you any further compensation, and we don't want to offer you health insurance, and we don't want to offer you more hours. And it was like, there's something missing here. And I think for me, it took waiting to see it happen with other people. And it wasn't even, it was like members of the organization where I saw they were being treated differently. Other women of color were being treated differently. And then I realized that it was bigger than just me. It wasn't just something personal. And so recognizing that pattern is where it was really, I was still stuck in this mindset of, I'll just get another job. I'll just keep applying. But then I found that I wasn't finding something capable or worthy of my capabilities. And after waiting so long, it just kind of became, like I said, it just felt like this weight. It just felt like this job does nothing but weigh me down, even if it financially provides for me to an extent. I wake up and I go and I feel weighted, and there's nothing good in that. There's nothing good that can come of that. So that's really when I made the decision of, I'm just tired of feeling weighed down, tired of feeling like I don't have the opportunity I know I am capable of having, worthy of having. And I think that it just comes with like this moment of clarity where when you've been thinking on it long enough, you just know. And I've seen that in clients too.
That's really something that resonates with me as well personally, like not being able to do it, but not being given the opportunity that other people do because of who you are, which feels so almost hopeless. So based off of that, I want to ask you, have you ever lost hope in your cause because of the intensity of the unfairness that you face? And how did you bounce back from it? Because clearly, look at you now.
Yeah. You know, I think it's just that moment of clarity. I don't know. It's just this larger purpose than me. It's because it's no longer about me. It's about other people. And finding that purpose in what you're doing, no matter how I feel any given day, is really what drives me. And having seen the changes that I'm capable of making, and once I took away that ceiling and said I could literally do anything right now. If I want to scale my business, I'm going to scale my business. If I don't want to, I'm not going to. Like, having that freedom to be able to do that really set me free. And then finding purpose in serving others and being like, this is more than just what I can provide for myself. It's about providing something for other people. That is what gets me up every single day, over anything else, over, just no matter how I'm feeling, because knowing like that's a legacy. That's not just about me. What do I really want to leave? And like, I know that's morbid, like I'm only 24, but like, I always have wanted this deep purpose, and that's what I was seeking in all these spaces. And I enjoyed the journey long enough, like I said, until it was just like, I don't enjoy this anymore, and I've learned enough, and so here we go, new journey. But what I was really seeking in all of that was this deeper sense of purpose, and really only we can give that to ourselves. Only I could give that to myself. No one else was going to come to me and say, here you go, here's your life purpose, seek it out. So it was really up to me to get comfortable with that uncertainty and sit with it for a second and say, what do we really want to do if we were given the opportunity? You hear that question all the time, like, if you could do anything, regardless of money, what would you do? It's like, but really sit with that question for a second, and where does it take you? And, then what are you good at, and who do you want to help? And there you go. Like, you have a business, which that's oversimplified, but essentially.
Yeah, that's amazing. I really appreciate the answer because it's really inspiring to hear somebody who has found their purpose at such a young age. Because often you hear of stories where people like start in one job, like you, kind of how you did, but they don't eventually reach their purpose until they're much older.
Yeah.
So it's amazing to hear you doing work now
Mm-hmm.
to find that purpose and go on that journey.
And I want to add too, like, on average, we have 7 careers in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So it's okay to change. It's okay to feel some instability,
Mm-hmm.
like this is just one phase of your life. And I think that we get kind of tied up in this waiting and being like, well, it's not happening yet. But just if you're leaning into what you want and what you really want to do, it's going to happen. Like, I know that sounds kind of like woo woo, but like really truthfully, if you think about it, if you're applying yourself to something, even if you don't know what it is, but you're just applying yourself to what you want to do on the daily, you're going to find that path. Like, you're still taking the steps forward and you're going to arrive where you're meant to. So that's really my biggest piece of advice, is no matter what, it's like, what steps are you taking today or, this week or whatever?
Yeah. It's also important, I think, to like break it down on like a more bite-sized level, like how you were just saying.
Yeah.
I know we're running short on time. We have a few more questions here. So we have a question from the audience from Danny. Are there environments where the dominant members are people of color? And if so, do they conduct themselves such that they are not treating people in oppressive ways?
I think that a lot of activist spaces are more diverse, not necessarily nonprofit spaces, but again, it's a whole other sermon. But I think that certain spaces, there certainly are spaces that are led by people of color. But I think that they're kind of isolated in their own community, like in activist communities, you have to seek them out. It's not like they're just kind of out there all the time, because we exist in a different world almost. It's, we don't just, I don't know. We're not as I don't want to say present, but it's not as easy to be as present. It's not as easy to put yourself out there all the time. And so sometimes you have to seek those out, but they're worth it. But I think it's also somewhat irresponsible to say that just because we're people of color, we're not oppressive. Like there's racism within the Latino community. There's racism within the Black community. Like we all have our own places where we benefit from that oppression, to be fully honest with you. But I think it's about recognizing that. And for me, like, I was having this conversation with this group of like women of color, like this group chat, and it came up, of like emotional intelligence and talking to white folks about, like educating them on certain issues. And for me, I was like, I don't really have time for that. I don't make time for that. But where it is important to me is understanding where that comes from, like where that ism comes from. Why are they saying this? And it's because they benefited from it in some way. And it feels like when a more equitable society feels like people are now being oppressed because they've lost some privilege. That's just the way that it works. But I think that it's about realizing, for me, when I am part of those spaces or part of any kind of oppressive space, like making it not about me, and just, again, rooting myself in that sense of worthiness. So it's like they're getting something out of buying into this belief, and that is their own personal problem, because they don't feel secure in their own like sense of power, in their own sense of worth, in their own sense of whatever influence, what have you. And so now they need to benefit off of the oppression of another person. So yes, there are, POC kind of spaces, but I think it's irresponsible to say that. So taking that that thought of, like, if you do experience it, you don't have to make it, I don't want to say you don't have to make it personal, but like, it happens, and it's our responsibility to educate each other. And if you don't feel comfortable just taking kind of that thought of they're getting something out of this, and that makes it easier for me to have those conversations.
For sure. Yeah, we've been talking a lot today about systems of oppression and oppression in general, especially even from our own communities. And as a final question, I wanted to ask if there's anything that we as an audience and as a community that supports each other can be doing now to support spaces held and owned by people of color, and how we can begin to move toward the positive change.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that it's about being cognizant, again, about the choices that you have. So like, we all have power in making choices, and that varies from, like where you buy your groceries to where you support, I don't know, like local entertainment, to anything like that. You know, like, do you buy from Amazon or do you buy from the local bookstore? Like, that makes actually a huge difference. So I think just taking stock of those choices on the daily and really going after the information, even if it feels uncomfortable. Like, you know, you don't have to walk into the store and say, like, is this owned by a woman of color? But, you know, like, you know, what's the ownership like? Like, tell me the story about like this store, this whatever. You know, I think building almost that sense of community around especially the purchasing decisions that you get to make is really important and powerful. Because it's not just about like financially supporting that person, but like, hey, tell me your story, and, you know, helping to amplify that story. And the reason why I ended my talk with like, our stories, we need to tell our stories, they need to be heard and they need to be amplified, is there's a difference between telling someone's story on their behalf and amplifying their stories. Like, there's a moment where if you can speak from that experience, then absolutely, like, we need to be speaking about our experiences. But if you can't speak about that experience, pass the mic and help someone else amplify their story. So I think those are the big things. I know they seem kind of obvious, but they're actually very powerful of, you know, how do we tell our stories? Where do we tell our stories? How often? And who hears them? And what purchasing power do we have? And just always taking stock of those choices, because I think it just makes this more, you know, it just becomes more integrated into your everyday life. And then of course the obvious, you know, make sure you vote all the way down the ballot and like know who you're voting for and call your senator and congressperson. Those are all really powerful things. But also just, I think, as I've kind of alluded to, I think there's some separate communities that need our support, that kind of exist outside of usually where the benefits are given. So if we're able to support them kind of independently, that's still very powerful.
Yeah, and I think relating this back to Vibe Hub's question and your answer, being an accomplice and being able to do anything you can is so helpful. So thank you so much, Hannah, for being here, for being part of this Q&A. We really appreciate it. I learned so much information that I knew at an elementary level, and now I know more about. So thank you. And thank you, audience, for being amazing humans, sending in your questions, asking questions. We love the engagement here. Our next talk is in an hour at 12, so tune in for that. We have Dr. Richard Schuster coming in, so watch his talk if you haven't already. Go interact with the interactive space, and of course follow Hannah on Instagram. Her handle is Woc Space, WOCSPACE. Thank you.
Thank you.